So thank you very much for joining. So today I'm going to talk about rethinking API governance. And before I get on to that, how many of you are actually developers or engineers in here? Great, okay. Well, do help yourself to a sticker. We're on your side, and yeah, it certainly is that time to be thinking about being appreciated and that you're a developer, not a miracle worker. So do help yourself to a sticker. So I am Zoe Laycock. I'm at Tyke, not the gorilla. And essentially, I'm head of product marketing at the moment. But however, I did used to be a full stack developer, and thus my interest in API development. So what I'm actually planning to cover today, well, okay, things are not working. Okay, here we go. What I'm actually looking to cover today is taking a look at what do we actually mean by API governance? Why do we actually need it? How do we implement governance and build out a robust plan? So what are some of the key and essential pillars of doing that? Where does API management actually fit as an enabler of governance? And that's kind of the controversial point, because you might think that that's an oxymoron and it doesn't. So we'll take a look at governance and implementation using API management. And additionally, where we'll land is how API governance can actually be seen as an accelerator of product-led growth, API-led product growth. So the first thing to take a look at really is what exactly is API governance. I'm sure everyone in the room actually knows this, but essentially it's the practice and applying of rules and policies to your APIs, and the creation of processes and standards to standardize various aspects of your API design, development, and delivery. That's kind of boring as a concept. And many of us as developers and engineers and API designers probably think, boring, because traditionally API governance gets a really, really bad rep. And there's a real perception that it slows everything down, it slows us down. And I'm here to actually just rethink that and reframe it. Because although many API developers and designers may perceive aspects of governance as a blocker, today we're going to take a look at rethinking what API governance is about and how it can actually be an engineering accelerant. How it can actually help us go faster, but not only that, be more efficient and actually focus on the things that we want to do and that we do best, focusing on API creation, design, delivery, deployment, and really enabling great API products and product experiences rather than some of the systematic, repeatable tasks that perhaps we don't like to do. And we don't want to reinvent the wheel. So first, let's take a quick look at growing complexity of what we actually have to contend with here. So with omni-channel experiences, for example, we've got evolving needs in terms of how building API products and are affected by the proliferation of platforms and devices, and therefore platform experience. Today, when we actually build applications, we need to build out experiences for, could be web-based applications, mobile applications, desktop applications, could be smart TVs, AR, VR applications, and even IVI. And for those of you that don't know what that is, that's in-vehicle infotainment applications for smart cars, autonomous cars. That's actually kind of the last place that I found myself building applications for. But also the smart applications like chatbots. And all of these are potentially consuming and interacting with our products and services in different ways. Then you've got the complexity of multi-cloud and multi-region. The days of single public cloud deployments are gone. It's actually reported that about 93% of businesses are already moving to multi-cloud architectures and deployments. And commonly, most organizations are leveraging public cloud as well as hybrid cloud providers. So the factors driving this are technology options, but also organizations needing to potentially save costs, but also needing to scale their businesses and API services, be agile, and when delivering to consumers, trying to do that in a regionally localized and performant way. And then on top of that, you've got different architectural styles. So when we think about the styles of APIs, obviously we've got SOAP, we've got REST, we've got GraphQL, we've got Async API, and they've all got code standards and design patterns that we all need to keep up with that can vary. Making everything pretty difficult and increasingly complex. And then the growing complexity of application development. I mean, wow. I mean, when I started building applications, I was actually stressed out about just delivering web-based applications across 2 different browsers originally. Back in the day, I thought it was complicated when we were just talking about Netscape and Windows Explorers. That was ages ago. Sign of the times, shows my age, but things are just completely different now. And then product components. I mean, multiple product components made up of, delegated to aspects and of the requirements of your product. So that could be security or authentication, identity providers, looking at user access management, for example, really important for consumption and understanding how your API products are used, and we'll get back to that in a moment. But also, we need to think about API analytics and the different analytics of systems that give you better insight into your actual API and application performance and consumption. And there's a need to account for example, various different GitOps operations. And then also we've got to consider CI/CD pipelines and automation. And all of that needs to be taken care of, and a whole load of layers and considerations are adding to complexity when looking at the entire stack of how API products are being built and deployed, and how this adds complexity to those that are designing and building. And then on top of that, you've got compliance. Data sovereignty needs, for example, especially in multi-cloud and multi-regional environments. Then you've got industry verticals that have different compliant requirements for thinking finance and healthcare. You've got different interoperability and data standards to think about there when you're delivering APIs. And failure could actually have a really costly impact on your organization in terms of driving adoption, but also various risks associated with data management. And then we also need to support larger teams. So typically, larger teams, say enterprise teams, are actually working on different stages of product development in their own silos, and they're often running distributed runtime environments with APIs at different life cycle stages. And some of the rules for those life cycle stages can be completely different from one team to another. And we need to allow for flexibility of use case exceptions where that is the case. So API product essentials still are, in the face of all of this complexity, we still need at the top to be compliant and to really build in a standardized way. We've got to think about security, scalability, and stability. And underlying all of that, we also need to think about the layer of observability, monitoring, and analytics. Why? Because we need to understand how our APIs and applications, API-driven applications, are actually being used, consumed, and actually with APIs as products, this can be a vital part of productization to actually tier the access to those products. And in all of that, you've got lots of stakeholders: internal users, developers, DevOps engineers, API consumers, and partner businesses, all with different requirements, as shown here. So if API governance, the main activities of API governance are, as we can see here, it's pretty much about, it's about designs, protocols, quality reviews, contracts, and descriptions. But standardization is also important. This isn't exhaustive, by the way, but essentially, this kind of standardization that governance can drive actually helps us ensure that all APIs remain consistent, even when different designers and developers build them. So API governance should be seen, really, in this context as the development guardrails in order to bring consistency to this chaos that we've outlined. I'm going to use a 10-pin bowling analogy now. Essentially, guardrails, or the bumpers that go down the side. In bowling, that's because basically, it's to assist you to bowl straight. And if you bowl straight, you're more likely to hit a strike. And the more you strike, you're more likely to win. And in the case of APIs, governance and standardization is very much about helping API designers and developers to achieve a higher quality of delivery and performance. So moving on, the fact is that API governance aims to enable all stakeholders, but primary API providers and consumers, and helping them to actually maximize the value of the APIs that are built, and then also to ensure that APIs are actually consumable. They're understandable, they're easy to adopt, and will drive, the growth in usage. And there's much more to it. In addition to standards, we need to look at product definition, security protocols, and implementation. But I won't go into that right now. Let's move on to building a robust governance plan and the key components of what that entails. Very, very important is access management. These are the most common aspects of governance that we work with at Tyke. So certainly the organizations we work with are focusing on these areas and trying to bring consistency across these areas. So if we go into access control, I'm not going to go into all of this, but essentially identity governance. This can be done either using role-based access techniques, or it can be, we can take a look at, that's just absolutely gone out of my head, but role-based access techniques or attribute access control. So what's that mean? Most organizations actually use a hybrid of the two, where high-level access is actually accomplished through role-based access management, and then fine-grained controls, which can be attribute-based, could be which region you're in. It can be about the sensitivity of the data that is being exposed by the APIs. They're kind of attribute-based controls. And most organizations use a hybrid of both. We also need to consider ongoing maintenance and enhancement. APIs need extending and modifying and depreciating and retiring at times. This is all around the sort of maintenance area of APIs once we've actually put them out there. And we need to ensure change control. Versioning is there to keep track of this, and importantly, we need to apply governance rules to all versions of APIs to make sure that they're all standardized and all thoroughly documented. Important also here is backward compatibility and conventions that are actually uniform and standardized across the organization. I'm going to skip over this one. I mean, basically, it's compliance. It's very, very important in multi-region and multi-cloud environments. We have to think about data sovereignty and how data is stored and managed and processed. GDPR in Europe is a very good example of this. And then with compliance requirements and regulations, these vary across different geographic regions as well. So we've got different applications of open banking standards across different markets. And in healthcare, we've got different standards of web interoperability. For example, FHIR is one of the most well-known ones. And then when it comes to reporting, the measurement of API product performance and value, that's what we're reporting on, really. The value derived to API consumers and also to the provider businesses. And this gives us insight into usage, consumption, and then also on the compliance side of things, it's also important that we also, have a structure of auditing, ensuring a chain of compliance insights and trackable interactions. That's almost as important of just knowing how APIs are used and consumed. And many organizations struggle here with team structure. Who actually owns governance? This can vary, but it's important for organizations to be clear about ownership of governance strategy and continuous updating of governance strategy. And then as important as ownership is getting internal buy-in and driving adoption so that you can actually roll out consistent implementation across multiple developer teams where you've got bigger organizations. There's two approaches to actually doing that. You can actually have a centralized top-down governance approach. This can be commonly conceived as a bottleneck to speed, or you can have a federated distributed approach where each team is actually responsible for compliance. And some of the responsibilities around security and understanding the rules are actually devolved to each team. And there's lots of consideration and manual work around all of this. So to kind of make all of that more efficient and to ensure that you have a centralized control and management plane, that's where API management platforms come in. This is basically a quick look of just dividing the key stakeholders and looking at the different stages of API lifecycle management. And I guess with the API providers, they're going to create, they need to test and publish, secure and manage the APIs, as we've pointed out. But then with consumers, adoption is key. They need to be able to understand the value derived from APIs, how to actually extract that value, how to interact with the APIs, and therefore, documentation, developer portals become very, very important. It's not good enough to just put API products out there and just think that they will be adopted. So I'm going to skip forwards here because we are kind of running out of time. But essentially, we're just taking an overview here. Tyke, obviously, is an API management platform. We're flexible, we're scalable, and we're one of the best out there. Essentially, this is how our platform breaks down into what's provided to API providers and what they have to deal with across access control, being able to control API consumption with rate limits and quotas. There's an onboard debugger. It's important not only to know how APIs are being used, but it's important to actually be able to troubleshoot them and to really be able to work out what's going wrong when that comes up. You've got versioning controls. You've got the ability to roll out centralized policies. You've got your analytics. And the important thing with our approach and a differentiator is that we do actually provide analytics on board, everything you need to know really about top level in terms of API consumption and usage. But we also know that our customers and our prospects may well want to do other things with that usage data. They may actually want to integrate it into their own BI tools or monitoring tools. And so we actually facilitate the export of that data as well, so that customers aren't locked into us, but can actually do other clever things, particularly with API and application monitoring there as well.